Hey everyone, my name is Shannon Kennedy and I am the head coach of Ad1. Today with me, I have one of our challengers who is going to introduce herself in just a moment. So why don't you go ahead, say your name, what language you learned as a part of the challenge, and why you chose that language.
My name is Barbara, and I chose to learn German for the Add One Challenge. I have a good friend who's German. We met about 12 years ago now, and I always told myself that I would need to learn German before her wedding. So she got engaged last year, and I realized it was finally time for me to learn German. And that's why I signed up for the Add One Challenge because I'd been thinking about it for about 9 years at that point, and it was finally time to go ahead and learn.
And what drew you to the Ad1 challenge in particular?
I'd been receiving emails about it for a few months at that point, and I was really interested in self study for a language. So previously, I had learned Mandarin, French, and Swahili all through immersion because I was living, studying, or working in countries that spoke those languages. And so for the Add One challenge, I was particularly interested in how to learn a language when I wasn't in an immersion setting and thought that that could be a useful skill to have, not just for German, but for other languages as well, or for maintaining the ones that I already learned.
When you started Ad1, what did you plan on doing or what did you think you would be doing?
Initially, I thought that I would study 45 minutes a day, 6 days a week. And I had previously found a lot of success with Anki flashcards, so I assumed that, okay, I'll be doing a lot of flashcards, I'll have italki lessons, and I've had italki lessons before. And then I didn't know what else would happen. I knew there would be resources suggested as part of the Add One challenge, but I wasn't sure what they were or if I would adopt them or just kind of keep going with what I had been doing previously.
And what tools did you end up using?
So I did start with Anki flashcards and italki lessons. And then over time, I tried out different resources that were suggested by Add One challengers. So I subscribed to German Pod 101 and was listening to a lot of podcasts. And I also signed up for Glossica and started incorporating that into my routine. And I found that over time, I was using Anki flashcards less and using these other resources more and still continuing with the italki lessons.
What was your weekly study schedule like? When did you study? Was there a particular time of day that worked for you, or how did you fit it around everything else?
So I took a suggestion that I believe came from the Add One challenge, and that was to study first thing in the morning. And so I made up a point of getting up an hour early each day so that I could study before I went to work. And I found that really worked well to keep me on track, and that's when I was motivated because often when I get home at the end of the day, I might not be that motivated, or maybe I have plans already after work, and it's more difficult then to commit to language learning.
So let's talk about your process for creating your videos during Ad One. As a part of the challenge, you create 4 separate videos on days 0, 30, 60, and 90. So did you have any particular strategies for creating those videos?
So I didn't have any particular strategies for creating them. I just kind of went with it. And I would think if I did the Add One challenge again, I would probably be a bit more structured in my preparation. I just found that I said what I could and I didn't necessarily have a script planned. And then after, for example, I remember after the 30-day video, I spoke about a minute and I remember being really happy that I'd spoke for a minute in German all by myself. And then I think it was the next day that you posted in the Add One Challenge comments, Shannon, that we should go for a 3-minute video at day 30. And I was like, oh, really? And then I saw the other challengers that had done more preparation for their videos that had scripts and knew what they were going to say. And then they hit the 3-minute mark. And it happened with a similar thing on day 60 that I had a few ideas, but I didn't really plan it out. And I remember whatever the length of time I did for the video, again, a couple days later, it was suggested that, oh no, actually go for a longer video. And my video was once again shorter than what was suggested. However, I knew that day 90, I was going for a 15-minute video. And so I prepared, and I'd already been having italki lessons in German at least once a week that were going for an hour at that point. And so I was confident that the day 90 video, I knew that I had to speak for 15 minutes, and I was sure that I was going to be able to do that.
Were there any particular challenges that you faced as you were doing the challenge? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes, one challenge that I faced was that I was traveling for work and then also traveling home to my family over Christmas during the challenge. So I had to change my study schedule because of that disruption to my regular schedule. And so I found that it wasn't always possible to study first thing in the morning, especially when I was getting over jet lag. And during these trips, I found that the community of the Add One Challenge really helped because I knew that I was supposed to be checking in every day and saying that I had met my study goal and that there was other people holding me accountable. And so I think without that, it would have been much more difficult to continue the routine that I had established. And I did find that about a month and a half after the Add One Challenge ended, I had another work trip, and did keep up studying at that time, but I was definitely not as diligent on that trip as compared to the trips I had during the Add One Challenge.
For your day 90 video, you talked a little bit about it, but let's talk more specifically about how it went and what you did during your video.
So I'd been having regular italki lessons with a great tutor, and he was always really great at asking me questions about my day and what I thought. And so we didn't particularly prepare for the day 90 video. Instead, I just asked him if we could record the call, and we had a regular call as we usually would. And so I felt that that was something I'd become comfortable with at that point. Maybe in the future, if I wanted a bit more polished video, then I might have stuck to a subject that we had already discussed on which I had vocabulary. But I felt that for this case, it worked out fine for me.
And how did you feel during the call and then after the call, after you completed that 15-minute conversation?
I was really happy with myself. I was not worried about completing the 15-minute call because we had already been speaking at that point. But I knew that I'd really progressed a huge amount in the 90 days. And I found it was always good fun to go back and watch my day 0 video or watch my day 30 video in preparation for the call, just to note how much I had improved in that time.
And what would you say the biggest thing that you got out of Add One was?
Well, definitely better German skills. And in addition to that, I would say the routine of getting up early in the morning and practicing German before I go to work. And I've already thought that there are other skills that I want to learn that I can adopt and learn using this idea of just getting up an hour early. And so I'm going to keep learning German for the next 2 months until the wedding happens. And then I can practice my German with my friend and her family. But after that, I'm thinking, okay, what else do I want to do? And I can then replace my hour of German in the morning with something else.
What would your advice to someone just starting the challenge now be?
I think at the beginning, it was useful to try out different resources and then get into a routine of the ones that we're comfortable with. And everybody found different types of resources that worked well. And I would also suggest asking questions of the other Add One challengers for their feedback on resources. So it was really useful for me initially to ask other challengers how they were using Anki flashcards. And I got great feedback on that. And then later on, I was considering whether or not to buy a Glossika subscription. And it was an Add One challenger who told me when there was a sale happening and told me how they were using Glossika so that I could incorporate their ideas into my own study routine. And so starting out, it can be a bit overwhelming to figure out what I do first. And I knew initially that there was just so much vocabulary that I wanted to learn. But I gave it a shot and kept doing things that were working. So for example, italki lessons, and then other things like Anki flashcards. After a time, I found that they weren't as useful to me in my study routine, so I adopted different methods. Also, I found myself that speaking from day 1 wasn't a great fit for me. I think because I was too intent on only speaking German on my first italki lessons. And it was really difficult. And I think because I said I only wanted to speak German, the tutors on italki were only speaking German to me. And my first italki lesson, I was being taught by a different tutor the past tense. And I was just thinking like, no, this is my first italki lesson ever in German. I don't speak any German. Let's just do greetings and do greetings again and then do greetings a third time. And I think because I wasn't explaining myself in English and clarifying with the tutor what I wanted, then it was really a struggle. And later on, when a few weeks into the challenge, we were challenged to have our first italki lessons or try different italki tutors. I was thinking like, oh, I already did that. But initially it didn't work out so well. And a few weeks into the challenge, I realized, oh, right, at this point, it would be a lot more beneficial to me to start italki lessons.
From some of what you said, it sounds like the community played a big role in your Ad One. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
So the community was great to get ideas on what resources they were using and how they were using those resources. There's different ways to use the same resources. So, for example, Innovative Languages and their German Pod 101 podcasts can be used as a listening exercise or maybe as a dictation exercise. There are exercises included with the podcast that you may or may not choose to use. And it was really interesting to hear how other challengers were engaging with that same resource. And so initially I was just listening to the podcast, but then I got the idea from another challenger to use it as an exercise to listen and then write down what I was hearing. And that was a way to add to what I could get out of the podcast. So it was great to hear what their ideas were, especially since they were at a similar language level to me and knew the level of resources and the level of difficulty I was looking for.
Great. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Had a great time in the Ad One Challenge and learned a lot from it. It did a lot for my German. And I was at the bachelorette party of my friend a couple weeks ago, and her friends were really surprised that at this point I've only been learning for 5 months, and my German still is something to be desired for, but I was able to communicate and understand more of the conversation that I would have without the Ad One Challenge.